what I actually think happened was that some places there was some conversions by fire and sword, and some places there weren't. You can't make a blanket statement. I mean, from what I've heard of what Indian students have told me, is yes, they converted by fire and sword, and other places I've been told that they didn't. So again, I'm not going to pretend that I can tell that I actually know. Well, again, I think both are true. There's some of your Islamic rulers are tolerant and converted by persuasion, and some of your Islamic rulers converted by fire and sword. All right. The Hindus, a lot of times, with the caste system prevailed among Hindus, so the Muslims oftentimes set up a system similar to the caste system. Basically, a lot of people have the habit of borrowing the customs of the people they conquer, and the relationship between Islam and the Hindus was no exception. Again, the jump to the 20th century, when the British ambassador landed with his airplane with the papers for independence, he didn't hand Gandhi one sheet of paper. He handed Gandhi a sheet of paper and said to Gandhi, now you form your nation. But then he had another sheet of paper which he handed to the Muslims and said, now you go form your nation. And the people of India were very upset. They started fighting a big war, and this war has gone on ever since. As India and Pakistan go at each other. And we've tried to be friends with both sides, and at the same time, both sides have at times been our enemy. All right. I got permission from my sisters to tell this, but so when I was 18 years old, my two younger sisters, ages 10 and 8, got into a fight. And the 10-year-old was, of course, getting the best of the 8-year-old, and I thought this wasn't fair, so I thought I'd intervene on behalf of the 8-year-old. But the next thing I knew, both of the girls were pounding on me. What does this have to do with world history? Quite a bit. As the United States has found out the hard way, and it's dealing with Latin America and Muslim countries, even communist countries, try to help one and make enemies of both sides. All right. None of my sisters remember that incident. That was many, many, many years ago. I had just started college at the time. All right. Now, moving from India to Southeast Asia. With Southeast Asia, you have geographically two main components. You have mainland Asia, and you have the islands off from mainland Asia. The islands consist of places like Indonesia and the Philippines. Those are the ones we talk about. And the mainland consists of places like Vietnam, Cambodia, Thailand, Myanmar, Malay Peninsula, these places. These are except for Africa, these are the most diverse peoples in the world. It is believed that the settlement of these places came in waves, with the first settlements coming in about 4,500 years ago, about 2500 BCE. That would basically be before the time of Abraham, or shortly, about the time of the Sumerians. They came in, and then another wave came in hundreds of years later, and the people coming in waves. These people speak more languages than any other group on the earth. But a lot of time, well, I'm going to try to draw it. Let's say you have the mainland here, another peninsula down here, and then everywhere you go you have mountains, mountain. Then you have the islands, mountains and more mountains, and then you have another island over here, mountains and more mountains, so on and so forth. Between the mountains and the ocean, it has been impossible for any conqueror to conquer. I don't believe even Alexander the Great could have done it. You'd have to climb up a really, really steep mountain. By the time you got to the top, your army would be half gone. And by the time you got down, the other half of it would have fallen down, slipped, and broken themselves to pieces. These people have moved around through the valleys because the mountains are really, really tall and really, really steep. And again, you cannot conquer them on horseback. And when you're come in from the sea, you're exposed until you can get a toehold on the land. So these people are very diverse people. Various kinds of religions come together here. They speak many languages. Again, a lot like the United States, a melting pot, except the United States basically had one language it dominated. And religiously, they were more cohesive than these people were. But these people, again, impossible to unite them. No conqueror ever did. One thing that makes this area attractive, though, is that rainfall is abundant, the weather is predictable. Now, folks, that's in your book. That does not apply to what has gone on in the last year or so, particularly this year. The weather has been anything but cooperative, but again, traditionally, their rainfall has been predictable. It's always come when it's supposed to, and they've had enough of it. They have a rainy season called monsoon and dry season. But this year they've had more bad weather than they've ever had. Anyway, they were able to farm. Civilization was slow at developing. These people have had a tendency to be primitive and practice animism. But now the ones that lived along the seacoast became civilized first because these people do grow things and they have products that the rest of the world wants. So people from India and China would come in, offer to trade with them, set up trade. The people on the seacoast then became civilized. Then the people began to realize, hey, our animistic religion might be keeping us primitive, so they would look to India for the religious guidance. China's religion seemed to not be spiritual enough. So they would look to India, and they would go back and forth between Hinduism and Buddhism, with Buddhism eventually becoming dominant, and Hinduism taking a back seat. Now that applies to places like Vietnam, Cambodia, Laos, and what is today Indonesia. Anyway, these people began to civilize slowly and build cities. The people of India, the Hindus and Buddhists both sent missionaries to try to teach these people their own religion. And again, one thing that they had that led them toward Buddhism was these people tended to be egalitarian as opposed to being hierarchical. Now, I said this in this morning's class, and I'm going to say it now. One thing that changed my mind about a lot of things was teaching elementary school for 5.5 years. And I said to my dad before he died, I now understand why some nations set up a nobility and wanted to separate themselves from the ordinary people. Because the ordinary people appeared to be not very smart, not very wise at all. And nobles knew that they were smarter, and they could not raise the IQs of the common masses. Now, that's their opinion, not necessarily mine. So they set up a hierarchical system to say, we're nobles, we're better than you, and they set themselves apart from the others, from the other people. All right, having said that, folks, before you think I think it's the greatest thing in the world, you take some of these poor outcasts and move them to the United States, and they become the greatest nation on earth. I mean, I don't mind telling you, I'm descended from a penniless immigrant who came over here with practically nothing, and I'm not the least bit embarrassed to tell you that. Most of this country was made up of Europe's, Asia's, and Africa's outcasts. So the nobles who put up walls and barriers to separate themselves actually did not do themselves a favor. Hardly anything that was invented by noblemen. Hardly anything that was learned by noblemen. Well, Sir Isaac Newton was made a nobleman late in his life, but he earned it because of his achievements. But he was not born noble. Anyway, just thought I'd throw that in. I mean, there's two sides, flip sides to the same coin, I think. These people then began to build large cities after a while. Now, the most famous of their cities was Angkor. I had never heard of Angkor Wat, but many years ago, a person at Lockheed who knew that I was a history major, several years before I became a college teacher, bought me a National Geographic magazine. The magazine was devoted exclusively to Angkor Wat. The story of Angkor Wat for us begins when a European man was roaming through the jungle, and all of a sudden the jungle just opened wide open. And there in front of him was a big, huge stone city that was completely, totally abandoned. Some of the buildings were starting to crumble. They were all made of stone. Some of them were still in like tip-top shape, like they could be lived in if a person wanted to. A 6-foot-long black snake slithered across his path. He and the snake ignored each other. Out from the window of one of the buildings, the window no longer had any glass, but out from the window appeared a lion, a tiger face, staring. They stared at each other, but the tiger and he left each other alone. He went and explored the city for a while, then he went back to civilization again and told his fellow Europeans what he'd seen. Europeans had been hearing for hundreds of years that there was a city buried deep in the jungle. So Europeans went to explore it, and yes, there it was. So they began to inquire, and what made this city fall? What is wrong with this city? And they construct a history. The Angkor Wat once was capital of a big empire, an empire in the middle of the jungle. But after a time, two things happened. They were threatened on all sides, as well as threatened from within. The Thai came in from the north. From these people get the name Thailand. The Thai were only a half civilized, you might even call them uncivilized people. Most of the people that hit them were uncivilized. And you have to wonder, wait, now they could keep these uncivilized people at bay before, why couldn't they now? And now your National Geographic article said something that your book doesn't say, but I'm going to tell you what it said. It said at first their kings were Hindu. As Hindu kings, that made them energetic. Let's go out and get them. It made them conquerors. They went out and tried to get more people who would pay taxes to them. They got richer. Then came a bunch of Buddhist kings. The Buddhist kings were more passive. What will be, and we can do it about it. We accept what is as being the will of heaven or the will of nature, whatever they call it. Just accept what is what should be, and don't try to fight it. This made them more passive. The city was hammered on all sides by if people sense that you're weak, they're going to come in and take what you have. Think of that next time you favor cutting military spending. Or if people think that you're rich, they're going to try to come in and siphon that wealth off of you. Yes, they will. Anyway, the people of Angkor Wat abandoned their city. The Thai might have come from China. We're not sure where they came from. The inhabitants of Angkor built the city of Phnom Penh. I'm not going to write that down, but just know that they went to another place and built another city. And another problem they had, folk, and this is a problem we don't have here, a city built of stone. You may think it's going to last forever, but here's what happens. The stone will start to crack and crumble. I mean, now maybe if the stone always had the same temperature and the sun never shone on it, but that's not real. What happens is the sun shines on one side of the stone, not on the other side. The one side expands, and if that keeps going on long enough, the stone is going to crack, going to crumble. And folk, how do you rebuild a stone city? Now, I'm going to look at like this building. What you're seeing, if you look around at the walls, you might say, "Oh, I see block." Actually, what you're seeing is paint, and you're seeing what might be sheetrock behind you. When the paint starts to chip a little bit, you get some man come in here with a brush, and he'll repaint. When the blocks start to crack a little bit, you'll get someone come in here with some kind of compound to fill in the cracks and paint over it. When the sheetrock starts to crack, you get someone who knows how to smooth things over and redo it. What do you do with a stone wall that cracks and crumbles? Now, eventually this building's going to get really old. Well, they'll just come in with a bunch of bulldozers and wrecking crew and tear it down and build another one in its place. You can't do that easily with a stone structure. And this is what has happened to so many, now Jerusalem, Israel is an exception, but what's happened to so many stone cities, as they crack and crumble, they find it really hard to replace. And they wind up abandoning their whole city after a while, and just whoever wants can have it. Well, the animals come in and they take over. The snakes, the tigers, and whatever else. All right. Malaysia. By Malaysia, I'm talking about Indonesia, the Malay world. You may know Malaysia has made news in the last couple of days because they had lost a big airplane there. That's an ongoing story. The Malay people were plagued by competition from within themselves and from the mainland. Island people are difficult to unite, even though lately we can do it because we have fast boats and airplanes, but in the olden days it was difficult for people to unite when they were separated. But they finally got a powerful ruler who was able to unite all these islands and form what is today known as Indonesia. Indonesia was for a while conquered by the Dutch. Now, I remember as a kid, I heard that Columbus was born in the West Indies. Columbus landed in the West Indies, pardon me. Now, Alexander Hamilton, on the other hand, he was born in the West Indies. And I got to think now, if there's a West Indies, there must be an East Indies. So I got to searching my maps. And sure enough, the East Indies are 10,000 miles away. They are there. 10,000 miles from the West Indies or the East Indies. And when Columbus landed on an island, he thought he was in the East Indies, when actually he was in the West Indies and didn't know it. At least that's the standard story. These people, they give the world a lot of rice, a lot of spices, a lot of nuts, things like that. Their religion, like the others, began with animism. But then as they became more civilized, I have to admit, animism is a religion mostly of primitive people, and eventually a lot of animistic people like that. So they went from animism to Hinduism and Buddhism. Again, as merchant ships came in, oftentimes carrying missionaries, and these people were eager to embrace these religions. All right. Again, India had a tradition that was contradictory, had a tradition of unity, but they seldom lived up to it. These people, Southeast Asians, could not unite. The next chapter, we're going to talk about the people who could and did remain united for much of their history. The Chinese. Again, I'll close with this thought about the Chinese, and we'll actually begin this chapter on China next time. China, like India, went through periods of religious turmoil. They went through ups and downs, and they had problems with barbarians. Several times China was overrun by barbarians. And I wonder what would have happened if you could go back in time and tell the Chinese people build bridges, not walls. The type of people they had for neighbors who would come in, steal everything they could, and rush back, including your wives and children. And they know that they were going to take your daughters and use them as sex slaves, and your wives the same way. These were the neighbors that the Chinese had to contend with. And again, why am I mentioning that? Because I think it applies to Halloween in the year 2018. Still applicable. will say this, in the morning class, they're lively, they'll discuss. This class, it's more difficult to get people awake. Maybe it's the time of day it is, after a big afternoon meal. I don't know when the last one. Anyway, then we'll talk about the Chinese, and I will close with this. The Chinese were the people who almost, if the Chinese would have done what they were capable of, I believe I'd be teaching this class on Mars right now rather than here on Earth. And I believe mankind would have gone that far. They were the people who started out like they were going places, and at times looked like they were about to burst out of their seams, and they stopped. They had banking, they had paper money, they had unity, they had a big country, and look at it. We'll talk about why come Monday. Everybody have a good weekend. We'll see you Monday. Look at chapter 10.